Unique people leading unique lives shape and inform Iowa City. This community is enhanced by these women and men who live in our midst, working, teaching, creating. Welcome to a series of conversations with people who have stories to tell. Join my guests and me, Ellen Buchanan, in a series of interviews called One of a Kind. J. Allen Holstein is a well-known professor of religion at the University of Iowa. Headlines in newspapers and magazines reflect the reputation of this popular teacher. Here are a few of them. Students flock to hear U of I professor. Unorthodox methods attract quite a crowd. This religion professor is hell on wheels. Seeking God and finding more questions. Religion professor offers lesson on life, just live it. If you would walk into McBride Hall on campus, you would see Professor Holstein teaching a course called Quest for Human Destiny to about 700 students, and they are spellbound. He is quick-witted, challenging, entertaining, intense, and provocative. Not only does he teach Quest for Human Destiny, but the Judeo-Christian tradition, attracting hundreds, Old Testament survey, again in the hundreds, and a course called Literature and Philosophic Thought, the Holocaust. J. Holstein was born in Philadelphia in 1938 and graduated with a degree in philosophy from Temple University. He studied at Hebrew Union College in New York City, where he spent 6 years studying to be a rabbi. He received his PhD in Bible from the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. Rabbi Holstein moved to Iowa in 1970 and became the J.J. Mallon Professor of Judaic Studies. He's a member of Who's Who in America, and in 1990 was honored by the university's Council on Teaching for excellence in teaching. He is the author of The Jewish Experience and many articles and publications. Jay's spirit is ecumenical and generous as he speaks to numerous Christian Bible study and Sunday school groups. His avocations include running and Taekwondo, and he is the father of 2 children, Sarah and Joshua. Welcome.
Good to be here.
Your story, I know, begins, like I said, in Philadelphia.
Right.
I read once that your grandfather had quite an influence on you. Was he a rabbi?
No, my maternal grandfather owned a trucking company in Philadelphia, and he wound up in Philadelphia under what can only be called curious circumstances. He was born, grew up in Latvia, and the persecution of Jews there convinced him that the only place for a Jew to live was in a nation state where Jews ruled. He was a Zionist, and he was intent on getting to what was then called Palestine. However, he got on the wrong ship and wound up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Lacking the means to move, he settled in in fact never traveled to Israel until near the end of his life, and when he came back he told me that he preferred Philadelphia. He was not a rabbi, but he was active in all facets of the Jewish community in Philadelphia, and more important, he had a real sense of the tradition. He was knowledgeable in the tradition, and he was hell on wheels. Not me, but he.
Did he teach you, I mean, did he instruct you, or was it kind of by example?
I would spend Sabbaths with my grandparents, and my grandfather and I would go to a synagogue, and typically after synagogue, he would stop at someone's home, and they would discuss that portion of Scripture which had been read in synagogue that day. And these discussions were filled with anecdotes, humor, vituperative infighting. These were people who knew the text, believed that it was a guide for life, and these were knowledgeable people who tried to apply this text to everyday experiences. And I used to sit there. It was like watching great tennis matches, great basketball players. That was a spellbinding experience, and my grandfather was very, very active in this. He knew the text.
So on the streets of Philadelphia, when you weren't accompanying your grandfather,
Right.
you were playing sports?
Well, you know, that's a really good question. My dad and mom were dirt poor, and they lived for the first years of their marital life with my grandparents. I grew up in my grandparents' home. It was an ultra-Orthodox home. There were no sports. We were living in a kind of Jewish ghetto in Philadelphia, and basically, I can't remember what I did, but I did not play sports, because when my father began his dental practice out in the wilds of Willow Grove, Pennsylvania, which was then a community of maybe 2,000 or 3,000, 20 or 30 miles to the north of Philadelphia, I saw children for the first time with balls. I had never seen anything. I was 7 years old. It was 1945, and I thought, this is really good. And we were the only Jewish family in this community, and I took to it immediately. I don't really remember what I did very much for the first 7 years of my life, except sort of listen at these dinner time tables to unbelievable conversation which I did not understand. Everybody, all the siblings, all my mother's siblings were living at home. It was a house filled to overflowing with all kinds of happiness and tensions, as are to be expected, and I was the only grandchild. I was doted on. I remember that. I remember that part.
So it's the center of the universe.
Right, I remember that part.
Yes. So at 7 you moved out.
Right.
And started to get involved in sports.
That's right. The ticket to becoming a member of the community among my peers was to be able to play sports. Football, baseball, and basketball was clearly defined. There was one schoolhouse for grades 1 through 12. I remember there were 57, 58 people in my graduating high school class, a very, very small community. And if you were a male and did not play sports, you were suspicious. You were on the outs. I took to it all right. It was a great, great experience.
You had a scholarship to Temple University in swimming and golf.
That's right. Eventually, I got good at a couple things, not real good. Temple did not have what you call high-powered programs, but it was good enough to pay my way. And when I went to Temple University, which is in the bowels of Philadelphia, I kind of re-entered the world which I had left when we moved out of my grandparents' home. Temple University, for the most part, was composed of Jewish students and African-American students. It was a wild conglomerate, large university, and I moved from this small town. It was kind of weird.
So you were a philosophy major?
Yes, I drifted into that. I was a very poor student. I was on probation, and I drifted into a required class on philosophy. And I remember the first day this nerdy-looking guy walked in with a book, one book, no notes, and I sighed to myself and thought, this is going to be a long semester. And he opened up what turned out to be Plato's Republic and read the first line. Yesterday, I went down to the Piraeus with Glaucon. He stopped reading and said, for most of the semester, we're going to discuss how Plato uses spatial reference in his dialogues, why in some of his dialogues Socrates goes down, in some of his dialogues Socrates goes up, in some of his dialogues Socrates moves on an even plane. We're going to try to discover what clues Plato gives us by offering these spatial reference. And Ellen, for a reason that is utterly and completely mysterious to me, that hit home. I thought, wait a second, somebody writes so carefully that a clue is of such import that if you miss it, you miss a lot, and this guy opened up a whole world for me. I hate to talk like this because it sounds so cliche-ridden, but I'm telling you, books were in no sense a part of my upbringing once we left my grandfather's home. And I was playing sports. That's what I lived and died for. And this guy opened up the world of ancient Greek philosophy to such an extent that I decided to follow in his footsteps. By the time I was a senior, I had been accepted to Princeton to do graduate work in philosophy. I was ready to go.
And what happened?
I was going with a girl. She asked me if I'd go to a lecture with her. Listen, I'd have jumped off a building with her, you know. I said, okay, I'll go to a lecture with you, absolutely. And we're sitting there, and a nerdy-looking guy walks in holding a book. Now, you would think, see, that would sort of, I would have learned something by now, and I sighed to myself, this is going to be a long time till we leave this. And he turned out to be a professor from Hebrew Union College. And he opened up this book, which happened to be the Bible, and he read the first line from chapter 22 in the book of Genesis. And God decided to put Abraham to the test, and he said to Abraham, take your son, your one and only, the one whom you love, take him to the land of Moriah and burn him to a crisp. And this guy stopped and said, this is a problem. And for an hour and a half, he talked about the interpretive crux, the interpretive problem that any reader with a brain in his head has to meet in order to understand this story. It's an impossible story. Why is Father Abraham willing to act like a madman? People have justified through the ages all kinds of heinous activity in the name of God. What's the difference between them and Father Abraham? And this guy was great, and my grandfather came back to me. He came back to me. I started hearing these Saturday mornings, and afterwards, the woman said to me, I remember, this was bad. She said she didn't like it at all. And I said, I believe I'm going to go talk to this guy. And she said, I'm leaving. I said, well, I'll see you. I'll see you. This is really new, see, for me. The woman went this way, I went that way toward a scholar. And I asked him where he taught. He said, Hebrew Union College. I said, what's that? He said, it's a rabbinical seminary. I said, if you go there to study, do you have to be a rabbi? He said, well, that's what happens. I said, well, what if I really was interested in studying Bible with you? And, I mean, how many times do you have to see Michael Jordan play to know that he's Michael Jordan? I'd seen this guy in action. It's true only for an hour and a half, but I knew what he could do, and I wanted to be able to do it. And he said, it's a professional school. If when you graduate you don't want to be a rabbi, go on to get a PhD. I immediately changed my plans, matriculated at Hebrew Union College, and studied with this guy for 6 years. The best decision I ever made intellectually in my life. This guy did not disappoint.
And so you were a rabbi.
Yes, I was ordained as a rabbi. And my assumption was that I was going to be a congregational rabbi. I fell in love with the idea of propagating Judaism. It seemed terrific. And
what happened? You ended up going and getting your PhD.
I got this letter from Selective Service saying I was going in the Army as a chaplain. I was not married at the time, and I thought this was a splendid idea. You know, it's been 2 years at somewhere. There were very few Jews in the military at that time. I didn't know what I'd do, but play golf, something. For 2 years, sort of relax. And my teacher said to me, I don't think this is a good idea. I think it's just like treading water. It's not going to mean anything for your intellectual development. So I said, well, what are my options? He said, well, if you go on to get a PhD, they'll give you a deferment. So I said, I don't want to get a PhD. You know, I've been 4 years in college, 6 years in rabbinical school. I want to relax. And he said, well, I'm moving to the Cincinnati campus. There's a good PhD program out there. Come out and try it for a year. So I said, only for a year. 4 years later, I got a PhD. You know, and that was another great experience, because when I moved to the Cincinnati campus, there was not one professor of Bible, but 4 or 5. None of them as riveting for me as this man. He recently died. His name is Hanan Brichto. But first-rate scholars, and I began to learn what I did not know about the Hebrew Bible, and that was important.
And then at that time then, you didn't go and find a congregation.
No,
you ended up at Iowa in 1970. What?
Ellen, I assumed that I was going to go to a congregation. It was a matter of course, and then it was a month away from my graduation. I had tentatively accepted a job offer in Florida, nice warm place by the sea, and one of my teachers, Samuel Sandmill, was offered this job at Iowa to come here to be director of the School of Religion, and he turned it down and gave them my name, and they got in touch with me, and I said, you know, I don't know. First of all, Iowa was like a vague idea to me. I knew they
Easterner.
At that time, that's right. They had a good football program. I think Evashevsky was there then, but I didn't exactly know where it was, except I was in no hurry to get there. And I was in no hurry to teach at a state university. I was in no hurry to do it. I didn't want to do it. And Samuel said to me, listen, this is a good opportunity. It's a good, solid job, and you have a chance to do something. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, there are almost no Jews. And in Iowa, you have a chance to teach Judaism in an atmosphere where it might count. And he said to me, his area was Christianity and its relationship to Judaism. He said to me, and it got me. It was like a punch that landed. It's the great tragedy of Western civilization, what Christians have done to Jews. The persecution of Christians, of Jews by Christians. It's a terrible tragedy because we're one religion. And go teach them, he said. So I said, all right, I'll interview. And I came out here, and George Farrell, whom we both know and like, Farrell was director then, and he said, you think you'll be able to teach in front of hundreds of students? I don't think so, I said, you know, my classes are 6 or 7. I was teaching as a graduate student 6 or 7 rabbinical students. I said, I don't think I'll be able to do that. He said, well, that's what you're going to have to do. I said, well, I don't think I'll be able to do that. I said, well, it's what you're going to have to do. So I don't know, make it long. I came here, and he brought me into one of his courses in McBride, which is now the Judeo-Christian tradition. And I remember walking in there thinking, I'm not going to get one single word out. My throat was dry. I remember standing at the podium, and it was awful. It was just awful. And listen, he was humiliated. I believe if he's honest, he will tell you that 5 minutes into that lecture, he thought he'd made a mistake.
But he saw something in you.
Listen, he had no backup plan. I was it.
You were it. But now, I mean, you started out with just a few students, not in that class, but in other classes. Didn't you have just a few students? And
my other offerings were, I had 2 or 3 students. Some days I would go, there was no one there, you know. It was kind of humbling. You walk into a class. I'd heard that there were certain rules about how long a student should wait for a professor, but I'd never heard how long a professor is supposed to wait for a student. I'd walk into a class, nobody there. And it dawned on me that it's not enough to have something to say in a free marketplace like the University of Iowa, where a student is offered 100 opportunities to fulfill a requirement, let alone electives. You had to connect. And I went around, I'd sneak into classrooms, large classrooms where teachers with good reputations were teaching to see what they were doing, and I saw that they were all doing different things. So in the beginning, you know, Farrell would wear a tie then. I'd wear a tie. That didn't work. It didn't work. It just didn't do the job. You know, I changed ties. It still wasn't working. And I figured out you got to do what you're comfortable doing. And what I figured out what I'm comfortable doing is talking to a student as if we're walking down the street. And reducing everything to what appears to be the surface of human existence so that you can get beneath the surface and then bubble up back to the surface to understand why it is we do what we like to do. And great literature does that all the time. It entices you, it gets you involved in what we like to do. We like to eat, we like to love, and we like to fight, apparently. And then it tries to explain why we're motivated to do these things. And then you go back to the surface, and you begin looking at life and loving and hating, I suppose, in a new way. And I gradually, very, very gradually, I got comfortable doing this. It took a long time. 27
years and
here.
You've been here.
That's
You've been teaching, and now they're...
No, I still have plenty of bad moments. Plenty, plenty.
What do you want your students to...
I remember what Sandmill said to me. I've got a twofold agenda here. One, and most basic, my grandfather's hovering over my shoulder in every class I teach. He was convinced that if you scratch a Christian, he will bleed anti-Semitism. He was absolutely convinced that Christians, by virtue of their Christianity, dislike Jews and Judaism. I don't agree. His experience was such that that is the sad conclusion he came to. I don't agree. So what I want to show these students is, A, it's very difficult, first of all, to understand what Judaism is, so don't generalize. B, have you ever thought about what Christianity is? Do you understand it? How come there are so many forms and varieties of Christianity? Jerry Falwell is a Christian, Jimmy Carter is a Christian. They can't stand each other. Who's the true Christian? It's a problem defining something as vast and complex as a great religious tradition. So be aware of how little you know. C, understand that in many ways Judaism and Christianity speak with one voice on all of the great issues. What is the meaning and purpose of life? What does it mean to be a godlike person? What does it mean to try to strive to be better than you are? With one voice. And so if you're decrying Judaism, in a way you're decrying the gentle Jew from Nazareth, Jesus, who became the founder of Christianity. So that's one agenda, and I understand that I'm crossing the line here, that in a state university, perhaps this should not be my agenda. So it is coupled with another agenda, which is tight, scholarly analysis of what it is I'm trying to teach, which takes nothing for granted, which does not pull any punches, which does not say good things about Judaism if bad things need to be said, which does not say bad things about Christianity if good things need to be said, but just teaching the Hebrew Bible as I hope Shakespeare or Melville or Hemingway is taught, teaching it as great literature and letting the chips fall where they may. So what I want them to get is A, a respect for how difficult it is to learn anything, and B, an understanding of how we're all in this together. And labels are a total and complete waste of time. Every once in a while, a student will come up to me after my lectures in the Judeo-Christian tradition and say, I really like your lectures. I think I want to convert to Judaism. Or I laugh at him. I just laugh at the student. What do you know about Christianity? I said, if I were born a Christian, it's a very good possibility that I would still be a Christian. And I would be the same kind of human being I am today. Other students will come up and insist that although they like my lectures, they're still strong Christians. What does this mean? I said, are you lifting weights? What is this? What is strong? What does strong mean? If someone says to me I'm a Christian, it means nothing to me. If someone says I'm a Jew, it means nothing to me. How do they treat me? How do they treat my children? Can I turn my back on them? Are they reasonably decent? Labels, labels. You know who took labels seriously? Nazis took labels seriously because they lead to convenient stereotypes. You can separate the good from the bad and everybody's happy. It's like life is a cowboy movie, but life isn't a cowboy movie. People are complicated, complex, and
that's what you're trying to get.
That's what I'm after. So I'm after questions and not answers.
And it's the seeking, like you
Always.
said.
It's the
always,
quest.
It's the quest
It's the
and
quest.
not getting there.
We never get there. And anyway, what would we do when we got there? We'd be bored, spitless. It's getting somewhere. It's getting somewhere, and hopefully it's exhilarating, hopefully it's challenging, and hopefully, if you don't take yourself too seriously, it's comical. Every once in a while when I'm in class, I stop and I look out, and students are taking notes on what I'm saying. Sometimes I don't have a clue what I'm talking about. You know, what am I saying? What am I saying? And they're just writing it down. I thought, this is hilarious. So that's good too.
Yeah.
It's good. Don't take yourself too seriously.
You said once, there's no winning in the game of life because all the cards are stacked against
That's
you.
right.
How do you tell this to students? I mean, isn't that a bit pessimistic?
My students are optimistic. My students basically don't believe in dying and death. These are things that happen to other people who are over 40 or something, and so they look at me as if I'm a little strange here when I press upon them the ineluctable fact that everybody who's been born dies. And generally speaking, we are not happy about this fact. So generally speaking, there is a dark cast to human existence. And no matter what you believe about afterlife, nobody likes to leave this life. Funerals are sad, sad, unbelievably sad experiences. And I press home the fact that unless you confront this, you're going to waste a lot of time in your life. And that may be the number one of all sins, wasting time when time is all we have. Do I make progress in this? I don't think I make much impact. I think they come in optimistic. Listen, I'm sort of optimistic too, you know. You like to be realistic, but
You've planted the seed. You planted the seed.
I don't know. I don't trust students who tell me this class changed my life. I trust students who write down an evaluation, you could have been better. You're overrated. That's right. That's right. It's true.
I know you love the Hebrew Bible.
That's right.
And like I remember interviewing you, I think it was around 16 years ago for a radio program,
Yep.
and I asked you which story was the most powerful for you,
Right.
and you mentioned the Abraham and
That's right.
Isaac story.
That's right.
Was it when you had children, Joshua and
That's right.
Sarah, did this even become more?
That's the heart of it. Ellen, that's the heart of it. I remember the first time I ever heard this story. This particular story is read regularly on one of the holiest days of the Jewish calendar. And I remember the first time I heard it, I was sitting bored spitless in a long, long service. And the rabbi took out the Torah scrolls and began reading this story. I'm sitting, my father's off to my right, and I heard this story. And I thought, well, if God appeared to my father and said, Jules, take your son Jay, the one whom you love, your one and only, and take him to Willow Grove and burn him to a crisp, how would my father respond? I looked at my father, and I knew for a fact my father would respond, no. So the problem in the story is, why does Abraham say yes? But until you confront the problem, the story makes no sense. And I believe unless you really have someone you love, and without whom life would be difficult, very difficult, this story makes no sense. What does it mean to face the prospect of loss? And how do you handle it? And why does God require something like this of Abraham? It'll have to be another story for another time, but in Old Testament survey, it takes me 4.5 weeks. 4.5 weeks to get through one chapter.
All right.
This one chapter.
Okay. Joshua and Sarah.
Right.
Your children, where are they now? Are they in?
Sarah is just graduating. She'll be graduating in May. She's entering the MD PhD program here, to my great delight. I like having her around. Joshua is a sophomore. He's just decided to major in geology. I believe Joshua's major focus in life at the moment is lifting weights, which I do not think he will mind me mentioning. I believe he's proud of it, and he's certainly starting to scare me a little. It's working. They're all right.
Great. I think I mentioned in the introduction that you are so generous about giving up your Sunday mornings and going to talk to Bible studies. Why do you continue to do this?
It's the same old story. It's many of these communities in the hinterlands in Iowa. Iowa City is kind of because of the university. I don't believe it's a typical Iowa town. You know, I'm an Iowan now. I've lived here longer than I've ever lived anywhere. This is my home. My kids are Iowans to the core. When I try to promote the University of Iowa to incoming students, as I often do, I'm doing it this Saturday, I tell them, don't listen to what I say, watch what I do. My children are in this university. I believe in this university. I think it's a great place. But there are many places in the state where people literally have never ever seen a Jew. Never ever seen a Jew, you know, flesh and blood. And I think it's important. They're not predisposed to hate Jews, but where there's ignorance, there's a potential for danger. So that when a decade or so ago there was a terrible farming crisis in this state, I began receiving all kinds of hate literature that the Jews were somehow responsible for it. So I go out to just touch base with them about a book we share in common, a book which was the Bible of Jesus. Jesus was not walking around with the New Testament, you understand. His Bible was the Hebrew Bible. That was his book, and it's our book in common. And I chat with them about these stories, and almost without exception, it works well.
That's a wonderful thing for our community, and I've been the beneficiary in the audience listening to you. I also read that that you mentioned, somebody asked you once who your heroes are. I'm always interested in who somebody's hero is, and you mentioned Moses and Socrates and Jesus.
That's right. That's right. I love the way in which these individuals are portrayed facing death. I think it's the crucial question. I think to learn how to live well means you have to face your mortality. And each of these men in different ways, each of these human beings in different ways, faced up to it with dignity, courage, and they faced up to it in such a way as a help for us, so that Jesus at the end in the Gospel of Mark is pictured saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? Which is troubling on the surface until you understand that it's a quote from Psalm 22. And Jesus at the end is directing those of us who take his message seriously to study Psalm 22 and the greater context of Psalm 22, which is the Bible. He's, at death, he's continuing to do what he did in life. The same is true of Moses, the same is true of Socrates. I appreciate this. I appreciate it. We learn from it. And the writers who wrote these stories are, I'm beholden to them.
To move on to your avocations from your vocation, you're a runner, and I know people in our community have seen you run, and you also are very interested in Taekwondo.
Yes.
You used to run marathons.
Yes, I quit running marathons. I tell people I quit running marathons because it interfered with my workout cycle, but basically I quit because I think I got old. I got real tired.
But you're still running long distances.
Yes, but I no longer compete at all, but I run all the time. And Taekwondo came about because my son, who at the time was 8, said that he'd really like to do. He was watching a martial art movie and he wanted to do it, and he dragged me to this demonstration. And it was in the basement of Wesley Foundation, and there were these people milling about in white pajamas with different colored belts on. I thought, this is ridiculous. This is utterly ridiculous. What am I doing here? And this guy came out after a while, and everybody stood at attention and bowed to him. He could barely speak English. He had just come from Korea. And he said, today, show you something. I'm not mocking him now, because he turned out to be one of the 3 great teachers in my life, but this is how I remember he sounded. He could barely talk English. Today, teach 2 things. 1, important. Other, and he spit. So I thought, what is this? What is this? And he bowed to us. And then he brought out this huge concrete brick, and he stood over it and gathered himself and put his fist right through the brick, shattering it. I thought, wow, I'd sell you know, Joshua was right there, and I thought,
no.
If God came to me and said, Jay,
No.
you can break this brick if you give up, okay. I thought, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen, to have this kind of power. You know, you walk into a place, say, hi, I'm Jay Holstein, whack, you break a brick. And he stopped, looked at us, and he said, break brick, learning how to bow, important. And
you were hooked.
That's right. First Joshua and I did it. After a month, Sarah joined in, and until he went to Korea, 6 years we did it. A great, great teacher, and it teaches humility in the end. It teaches gentility. It's an ironic art, because you learn all these devastatingly dangerous things, and you learn never to do it. You learn to be generous if you're good at it, if you're really good at it. I was never really good at it. I was pathetic at it, but my kids were like flexible and everything. Actually, I was really laughable at it, but we won't get into that.
But it meant a lot to you, though. He did.
He was a fundamentalist Christian. We got to be very good friends. We still communicate. He's back in Korea. He received his PhD. It was a great, great experience.
My last question, I want to get back to your teaching. What do you think is the most rewarding part of your teaching?
Every once in a while, you know, there's this Russian weightlifter, this great Russian weightlifter, who says that every once in a while you're lifting, you have this white moment where the weight not only is not heavy, it's helping you lift it. Every once in a while, it happens, rarely. You're lecturing, and they're with you. They're just with you, and you feel such an energy return from them that you feel you could fly. And you can't predict when this is going to happen, except if you don't prepare, it will never happen. But all the preparation in the world won't make it happen. It is a high beyond the likes. I've never experienced anything like it in a classroom. It may happen, you know, it happens once every couple of years, and sometimes it lasts for the entire lecture. Sometimes it lasts. The first time it happened to me, you know, I thought I had this breakthrough. You know, I thought, that's it, that's it.
I'm going to have this every day.
And the next time I went, it was terrible. So it's
a gift when it's given.
It's a total gift, and you accept it, you embrace it, and you appreciate it, and you hope and sort of pray for it. Again, you know, I sort of feel like a believer at the moment who is trying to explain to a non-believer an experience the non-believer hasn't had. Other people in my craft talk about it too. It's utterly mesmerizing. It has nothing to do with the size of the class, has nothing to do with the time of day. It just happens. And it's...
Well, we'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Everybody's going to be signing up for your classes again. My guest has been the University of Iowa's Professor of Religion, Jay Holstein. Jay's 27-year career at Iowa is remarkable. Students enroll in his courses in record numbers, often 2,000 a year. With amazing energy, passion, dedication, and humor, Holstein inspires students to question, to think, and wonder. He wants them to see that the question has never been about knowing, it's been about seeking. How fortunate that our young people have such a dedicated and charismatic teacher. Jay Holstein is one of a kind.